Scary story underwater expedition. In the distant future, when mankind has finally tamed the oceans, a group of researchers led by Professor John Smithson set off on a long expedition to the unknown depths of the Pacific Ocean. They could not know that every wave hides secrets that no one has ever dreamed of. On board their underwater station, called Neptune, a team of 8 scientists and engineers were preparing for the first dives. Among them was Sarah Martin, a biologist who wanted to discover new species of sea creatures. Her interest in deep-sea flora and fauna was not only professional, but also personal. Her father, also a scientist, went missing on a similar expedition many years ago. Now her thoughts were filled with both hope and fear. The first dive passed without incident. In the process of examining the ocean floor, the researchers found amazing creatures, giant jellyfish that glowed in the dark, and bright coral reefs that looked like living jewels. But the deeper they went, the more they felt the presence of something sinister. On the third day of the expedition, their underwater station recorded anomalies in the electrical fields at a depth of about 6,000 meters. It was a mysterious phenomenon. The navigation system began to fail, and communication with the surface was lost. The team decided to conduct additional research and went to a shallower depth in search of the source of the anomaly. As the team explored the area, they discovered the wreckage of an ancient ship covered in corals and sea sponges. The ship looked like it had kept secrets for many years. They decided to explore it, hoping to find clues about deep-sea inhabitants and their interactions with people. Each of them realized that they could stumble upon something amazing, but no one wanted to think about the worst. While the team was collecting samples, the night shift recorded strange sounds coming from the darkness. These were not just sounds from the depths of the ocean, these were screams. Screams full of pain and despair. Sarah felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The rest of the crew tried to ignore it, but the tension was growing. The next day, when they dived again, it became obvious that something was wrong. The samples they had collected and the artifacts lying on the bottom began to decompose rapidly, and strange formations appeared in their samples. They resembled eggs, but of a type and size that the crew had never encountered. Each day frightened them more. Despite the uncertainty, the crew continued to study the wreckage. One day, while exploring the interior of the ship, Sarah came across an old captain's log, which she knew had been lost in the depths. As she read, she was overcome with horror. The entries were full of stories of deadly creatures living in the abyss, of terrible rituals performed in the darkness, and of how the sailors fell victim to these creatures. Further, the descriptions became more and more insane. The captain wrote about how his crew began to disappear, about the visions they spoke of, and how they heard voices whispering in their ears. On the last page there was only one word: run away. At this point, contact with the surface was completely lost. No one could explain how this happened. In a panic, the crew decided to turn around and return to the underwater station, but as they made their way through tons of debris and garbage, they felt that something was watching them. The next day, they decided to split up. This decision turned out to be fatal. Sarah and her colleague, an engineer named Kevin, entered a particularly dark part of the wreckage, when suddenly they heard eerie rustling sounds. They turned around and began to gasp. In front of them stood an incomprehensible figure, devoid of clear outlines. It was an underwater monster, with eyes full of hatred and emptiness. On a bleak October evening in 2023, a group of explorers packed up their gear to set out on the open sea. The boat, named Seraphim, was anchored off the coast of a secluded island in the Pacific Ocean. The cheerful conversations and laughter turned to tense silence when Professor John Evans, the expedition leader, realized that they were risking not only their time, but their lives. The team consisted of 6 people: mechanic Matt, biologist Emily, oceanographer Luke, photojournalist Zoe, ecology student Kate, and, of course, the lead researcher, Professor Evans. Their goal was to study little-known underwater ecosystems and record rare species of marine flora and fauna that were not discussed in scientific circles. The night before they set out, John's heart was beating fast. Someone from the crew noticed a fog rising from the sea. It wrapped around the island, making it almost ghostly. "It's just steam," he reassured himself, glancing at his colleagues. "No big deal." When dawn broke, they set out into the open sea. The outlines of depth began to appear on the horizon, but soon the water temperature dropped sharply. Emily found this strange, but could not explain why she had this feeling of anxiety. A few days later, the Seraphim reached the point they had previously marked on the map. John ordered the Neptune submersible to be launched to explore the bottom. Images of the bottom, covered with gnarled coral formations and strange plants, began to flicker on the apparatus monitor. Thick, dense vines rose above the bottom, like breathing creatures. The excitement in the crew grew, but soon this feeling faded into the background. Luke began to notice that the images were becoming increasingly blurry, as if something was interfering with Neptune's cameras. "I can't figure out what's going on," he muttered, pointing his fingers at the screen. "There's no radio signal interfering. That's weird." That evening, the sky was overcast. The wind whistled around them, and the crew returned to the deck to discuss their findings. However, the excited joy of the January evening gave way to an eerie silence, as if something was watching them from the dark depths of the ocean. The next day, when they set out again for the underwater ruins, Neptune's screen began to show images of mysterious creatures hiding in the shadows. Emily screamed when she saw them, translucent shadows reminiscent of manta rays. They seem to know we're here," she said, her voice filled with fear. But the crew decided to continue their exploration despite their worries. They couldn't pass up the chance that this unique experience presented them. Evans inspired confidence in his colleagues, mentioning the scientific discoveries they could make. A few days passed. During one of the dives, the team discovered strange artifacts, stone tablets with incomprehensible symbols and images reminiscent of ancient graffiti. Their find aroused unprecedented interest, but this interest soon turned against them. When Matt tried to pick up one of the artifacts, a dull, deafening sound was heard from the depths, causing a riot of waves above the boat. Luke ran to the screen and saw a splash on the bottom. Blue-green shadows were darting beyond the visibility of the Neptune, as if someone or something was trying to get to the surface. "I don't think it's safe," he said, but his words went unnoticed. Evans was full of excitement and was not going to back down. It was one of those expeditions that you remember for a lifetime. A group of scientists, led by Dr. Emily Cartwright, set off into the heart of the Pacific Ocean. Their goal was to study underwater ecosystems and search for unexplored species of marine fauna. On board the research vessel Oceanus were the best specialists in their field: ichthyologist James Locke, biologist ecologist Sophie Tanner, and marine geologist Pastor Neil Henderson. From the first day of the expedition, everyone was inspired. They dived into waters where no one had gone before, collecting samples and taking photos of unique marine inhabitants. But soon their enthusiasm began to slip shadows. One day, when the team was submerged to a depth of more than 2 kilometers, their submersible encountered a sudden failure in the navigation systems. Emily was about to press the emergency return button, when a mysterious object appeared on the screen. Something that did not look like a part of nature. It was long and sinuous, with grey scales that reflected the light of their torches. Even at this distance, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. It could be a new life form, James suggested, but there was a distinct uncertainty in his voice. The team decided to investigate the object. They secured their devices and began to slowly approach. The closer they got, the stranger the object seemed. It was something that looked like a combination of a sea serpent and various other creatures that weren't recorded in textbooks. "I feel like we're not alone here," Sophie whispered, when suddenly they heard a dull sound, like a loud sigh, coming from the dark depths of the ocean. At that moment, Dr. Cartwright felt fear squeeze her heart. But curiosity was stronger. They began to record everything they saw, when suddenly the device shook and the screen went black. The ship shook, and everyone knew something was wrong. Neil tried to re-establish communication, but to no avail. They were left suspended, surrounded by the void. "We have to go back," James shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the growing hum. By this time, they had noticed that the creature seemed to have become smaller, as if it had dissolved into the waters. A cloud of darkness suddenly came through the porthole, depriving them of light. Then, in the darkness, they heard whispers, this time with a chaotic gurgling rhythm. As if someone was doing something terrible nearby. It could be echolocation, Neil suggested, but he couldn't be sure. Everyone in this underwater space felt like something was watching them. When they returned to the surface, they realized it was too late for them. On board the Oceanus, the experts discovered that some of the samples they had brought back had begun to change colors and shapes. And above the waves, under the moonlight, strange sounds were heard, whispers that grew louder and louder. The difficult nights continued. One by one, the team members began to hallucinate, meeting their dead colleagues, unsuccessful researchers who had not returned from previous trips. With each sound of the whispers, they became more familiar, and, eventually, Emily realized that she was hearing names. Each name was someone who had disappeared, and each name caused her inner dull fear. One evening, when everyone was trying to rest, Sophie went missing. At first, no one paid attention to her absence. Everyone was too absorbed in their own fears. But when they realized that she was gone, panic began. Emily and James decided to go down to the depths again with the submersible. The Atlantis expedition set off on an unforgettable journey to one of the most mysterious places on the planet, deep into the ocean, to an area shrouded in myth and legend. The team consisted of scientists, explorers and experienced divers. All of them were ready to solve the riddle of a lost civilization. On board the research vessel Oceanus were specialists such as Dr. Sarah Blake, an oceanographer Professor Jonathan Ford, an archaeologist and experienced diver and underwater cameraman Matt O'Connor. The first day of the expedition passed calmly. The team studied maps and conducted unmanned surveys of the seabed. But when the work was finished and everyone gathered on deck for dinner, the first hints of anxiety began to appear. The water around the vessel suddenly darkened, and a strange tension hung in the air. "It's just a trick of the light," Matt said with a grin. "The ocean has always been full of surprises." But his words did not calm the team. The next morning, the sun was shining brightly and the mood was lighter. The scientists were analyzing data when the alarm suddenly sounded. The team rushed to the monitoring screens, where they noticed an anomaly under the water. Something large was moving towards them. It must be a fish, Jonathan guessed, but he sounded less confident than he intended. They set up their equipment for a closer look. Some of the team called Matt over to come down and study the anomaly. He agreed and was soon in the water, his diving gear glinting in the sun. Matt was floating in the calm water when he noticed a shadow rushing towards him from the depths. His heart began to beat faster. He used a flashlight to scan the area around him, and saw something strange and eerie, the silhouette of a huge creature, framed by spikes and with several pairs of eyes staring at him from beneath the water. Matt was frightened and hurried back without waiting for a proper examination. When he climbed aboard, his face was pale. "There's something in there. It's not a fish," he said, catching his breath. The other crew members laughed, sure that Matt's fears were just a figment of his imagination. But after a few hours, the calm was broken again. Their ship began to shake with powerful jolts, as if something huge was trying to rise to the surface. "Drive." Blake looked at the screens in fear, trying to find the source of the threat. Soon another form appeared on the screens, multi-layered, like a wave, but with incredibly powerful tentacles.